Hello and welcome to Transform Finance with Michael Ryan. 25 minutes talking about finance and football. Well, the Premiership kicked off again on Friday night and Man United stormed to the top of the table. In what could probably only be described as we took the 3 points, we got a win. Probably wasn't the world's greatest performance, but we betted in 3 or 4 new players and it's great to get off to a win. Even if we were only top of the table for about 18 hours, we're now currently 7th. Great to see Leicester back at the Premiership, and that was a brilliant goal from Jamie Vardy on the back post last night to deny Spurs. Well, hey, most people deny Spurs, so he's in good company. This is the 3rd episode of the podcast, Transform Finance with Michael Ryan. And as I said before, we're going to go at this for about 25 minutes. I am recording it on the fly. I'm in a client location again this morning, getting this done before I head off to deliver a workshop. So the first 2 episodes focused on introducing me, the podcast, why I was doing it, etc. The second one focused on my 9-step success framework, how I set up transformation programs to increase their chances of succeeding. And that went down quite well. And I also issued that in narrative format within the newsletter. So one of those topics is what I want to talk about this morning, which is the first part. And how you go about creating a baseline for your project. It might surprise you to know that the baseline actually already exists within a particular company. Whether you account on a monthly or quarterly basis, everybody produces cost-based reports. And your finance director will know approximately what headcount exists throughout the business. Probably not broken down right down into individual team level. Probably know at a headcount level for, say, finance, HR, IT. And we'll know the approximate cost of that. And that generally is the starting point. But what I find is that most people don't really study that. They take a look at it at a headline level and then they move on and they'll produce it again the next month. But they don't study it whilst looking at the actual organization charts themselves. They just study it in isolation. And it's very important. I always believe that if you're going to succeed in a program, you have to start by measuring. And that's something that some people can skip over because they believe they're starting their transformation program because we need a new system. The existing ERP system isn't up to scratch. It needs to be upgraded. It's about to come out of support, etc. And they get target fixated on, well, that's where we're going. We're getting a new system. But every single one of these programs, their chances of success is, in my opinion, massively improved if you actually just create a baseline. Just create a starting point. Think of it as like going on a diet, or think of it as the first match of the season. Where were United starting from? Well, they were starting from 31 points behind City when City won the league last year. That's where they're starting from. And getting off to 3 points is a good start. How do you go about creating your baseline? Generally, when I turn up at a client, this is something that they have to go, right, we need some time in order to gather the information. So you're not alone in the fact that people don't immediately have this to hand. Possibly in the very best run, most profitable companies they do, but the bulk of the clients that I encounter, they don't have this immediately to hand. And there's probably, I would say, 2 to 3 weeks in which this information is sourced within the business, double-checked, cross-checked, updated, before you have a reasonable baseline. So generally what I say is if we're doing a feasibility study over 3 months, we'll start gathering the data on day 1, but we won't establish the baseline of the project until the first day of the following month. Because everything you're given in the first instance needs to be checked, sense checked, consolidated, and consequently you're not going to baseline it off the information that's handed to you on the first day. But it is not unreasonable to say that you have baselined it by end of the first month. And then you always have a reference point. So for example, we could baseline this podcast off the 1st of August. And say from that point on, we started creating episodes. And this is the 3rd episode. So what do we look for first? Generally, the first thing I look for is the top line numbers of the business itself. So if we're trying to establish a baseline, it's still very, very important to do that within context. Don't just focus on the finance team itself. Take your thought process above that and focus on the business first. So you want to know over the last few years what its revenue numbers are. You want to know at a total level what its headcount numbers are beyond finance, right into the front line. You want to know the number of sites that it operates from, the number of markets that it serves, the number of countries that it operates in, and this starts to set the context for your top level current operating model as to where you currently stand. But these are all numbers, so they contribute to the baseline. What's our revenue? It's 300 million. What's our total company headcount? It's 1,200. How many people are in finance supporting that? Probably somewhere between 60 and 70. And then we look at the other side of this. So if we know how many people are in a particular function, how are they structured? So what is the organization chart? Now you'd be surprised, actually, the majority of people don't immediately keep organization charts to hand. So again, this feeds into the opening 2 to 3 weeks of a baseline and exercise where we gather information around the business. And if needs be, we create the organization charts. And then we have to sense check them and double check them with the managers themselves to make sure they're live, make sure they're current. And you also have to look at, well, who's full-time employed, who's part-time, who's contract resource, agency resource, etc. Build the full picture. Don't just focus on the full-time staff. If you're using 20 people to process your invoices and they're regular full-time members of staff, but you still have 10 temps on top of that, then we don't have the full picture as to how effective your process is if we're only counting it against 20. We need to count it against the 30. View it as being that you are gathering every single key piece of information necessary to make the right decisions. So you wouldn't gather half the information if you were buying yourself a new car, would you? No, you gather as much as possible because you were about to spend your own money. And it's exactly the same when it comes to a project. Start off with the headline numbers of the business. Start to work yourself down to what is the headcount within finance. Then how is that structured by individual team? This is live, so that was my phone going off. How is it structured within the individual team? So from finance director down, what's his senior team? How many direct reports does he have? For his direct reports, how are his teams structured? And so on and so forth, right the way down until you've drawn the full picture. And then inevitably, we apply headcount against cost. And again, this is something that clients can sometimes struggle to get. But sometimes the best way to do this is just go straight to the HR team, straight to payroll, and gather the information at source and pull it all together. So you have an organization chart which tells you that the finance director is responsible for 70 staff, and the total cost of finance in headcount terms is the 70 staff. What does that actually add up to in payroll terms? That's what you're using. That starts you off, but that's only part of the picture. So we know who's involved in the process. We know who's involved in the organization, but we now need to then know is what kind of volumes are thrown at the process. So it's not enough to know, for example, that 25 people process accounts payable invoices. We need to know how many invoices they are processing. And the starting figure that we take for that is the annual volume of invoices. How many are you processing in a year? A company that size, 25 AP, let's say, for example, is processing 300,000 invoices in a year. On top of that, you will have credit notes, debit notes, and a variety of different pieces of information that you need to count, the number of statements, supplier statement recs, etc., etc., etc. You're building as deep a picture, as granular a picture as possible. Because what you're trying to work out is how efficient and effective and compliant is the process that you're starting from. So are we starting from a finance team which is already best in class? Or are we starting from a finance team which is, say, I always go on a maturity assessment of from 1 to 5? Are they 3? Or are they below that? Do they seriously need improving? Or do they actually have some red flags going off straight away with regards to compliance and risk? And all of these things start to come together. I got asked the other day, if you're doing process mapping, where do you start? And my strong advice to you is if you're doing process mapping, you actually start with the organization chart. So you can't avoid going back to the baseline. The baseline tells us where we start from, how many heads are in finance, what the individual team structure is. So taking our accounts payable example, we have 25 of them. We then may have them broken down between those of them that are responsible for actual invoice matching, those of them that are responsible for managing the payment process, those of them that are responsible for reconciling statements, or those of them that are responsible for resolving queries with the business. And so we know how the 25 is apportioned into the activities that it needs to do. And those activities, so if you took an organization chart and you just laid it out and you said, right, you have an AP manager at the top, and let's say for argument's sake you have 5 supervisors or team leads, and then within that you have 3 or 4 members of staff, depending upon what's the toughest part of the process to manage. Excuse me. You then have to go, right, well, what are the main activities of those individuals? So you would go right through the chart and you would go, right, okay, so the supervisor's role is obviously a managerial role, team development, training, monitoring, etc., etc. But the processes themselves, they have specific tasks to perform. It may well be as straightforward as matching an invoice, or it may be 2 or 3 elements of the core process in order to ensure variety within the job and also being mindful of segregation of duties. And when you write this down in an organization chart, you are baselining the people part of people, process, and technology. And when I have this picture, if you understand how finance is supposed to work, and you understand how a transformation program is needs to be set up in order to be successful, you can ask the right questions. So first of all, it helps to understand finance in the first place. Then you have the context. So I know it's 25 people. Within the 25 people, I know they process 300,000 invoices. I know they may possibly be processing an additional, say, let's just say for argument's sake, 80,000 credit notes. So therefore, I know that there's something wrong with the process. And I roll it forward from there. So we start with the org chart. Generally, I get handed it on the first day. Baseline the numbers, total business, right the way down to finance, headcount, and cost. Then play the organization charts into that. Then take the organization charts down to role description level. So give me the 5 or 6 things, 5 or 6 activities that each individual within the organization chart performs. And then we've got a fantastic starting point. I pretty much guarantee you that no company does that unless somebody went in to run a transformation program. But the learning in it, in terms of how you're structured, how you're operating, how effective you are, potentially where your risks are, is fantastic. Now, I'm sure companies that operate regular continuous improvements projects have this as their baseline, but I would recommend actually all companies do it. So we have the org chart, we have the activities that each individual is responsible for, and then we look at the process. We really look at the volumetrics. We look at the volumes that underpin the process. So as I said to you, that's headcount of staff. It's the number of invoices, the number of credit notes, the number of debit notes, all as examples. And then you will break that down amongst the team. So not everybody will be working on them. So for example, you might have, and you get the master data, so how many suppliers have you got? Say you might have 10,000 suppliers, but you might only reconcile 300 of them. So your reconciliation team is working off a metric of 300, even though the base metric is actually 10,000 suppliers. So it's all of that kind of flavor. So when I pick up an organization chart and start to go down to the process piece, I kind of know what I'm expecting to see through the lens of somebody who runs transformation programs. These pieces of information take a while to gather, but if you're going to do this right, baseline from the company down, if you're going to process map effectively, start with the organization chart and the activities of the individuals concerned. We're not talking job descriptions. We're not talking job specs at all here. We're talking about what are the 6 key things you're responsible for. Don't ask the teams to fill this in themselves. I would expect that the supervisor level in each department is capable of filling it in. And if they're not, then actually there's a piece that they're not managing. If they're not aware of it, that would slightly concern me. So then we move on to the process piece. We gather the key volumes, first of all, as I said, using AP invoices as an example. We go through all of the exceptions. So what are the query handling routes? What's our match rate? How many times do we have to go back to the business? Who are we going back to within the business? So this again means that we should have baselined properly in the current operating model how the business is structured. So it was useful to know, wasn't it, that there might be 70 people in finance, but there's 150 people in the frontline sales force. Invariably, it's the frontline part of the business that causes a process from purchase order requisition right through to payment. And you need to know how the rest of the business is structured in order to be able to go out to one of them to solve a problem. And this is part of the stakeholder analysis that we do as well. We want to understand how the end-to-end process works. In this case, procurement right the way through to payments, so the P2P process. We need to know who the key players are, people of influence, and the people who are actually doing it. One of the regular things that happens in finance functions is somebody will produce a league table of purchase order requisitioners who don't raise the requisitions properly, who don't perform the receipting exercise as part of the purchase order to receipt to invoice match process, and so hold up the entire process. And you have a supplier on the phone screaming to be paid, and the clerk going, well, I actually can't pay this because nobody in the business has authorized it. So therefore, you need to know who are the people in the business who can authorize everything. So baselining is an awful lot more than just headcount. It's an awful lot more than just the high level turnover number. It's an awful lot more than just telling me that there's 70 people in finance. Yes, it's an awful lot more than that, isn't it? You need to know all of this for the rest of the business. This will then tell you who your key stakeholders are. And you'll be able to go, right, okay, so the overall process might have 25 people in finance. The procurement team on top of that might have, say, another 15 people. And the number of purchase order requisitioners out in the business could be as many as 600 to 700. So you see, the community numbers in baseline in the purchase to pay process is vastly greater than the numbers that are actually in the finance AP team. So you need to think from the top down. You need to think big picture. And I always say it's just like playing centre back. Put your head up, look left, look right, look for all the threats, look right way across the pitch. Don't just look in your own silo and don't just look down. In terms of advancing this process from high-level numbers, total cost of finance, through the organization charts to activities, through to process, we wouldn't do the process from the bottom up. We wouldn't start by going and sitting with John or Jane and asking them how do they do their jobs. I totally tell people never, ever do that. You must do process mapping from the top down, okay? Now, organization design feeds into the process piece. As I said to you, do the organization analysis first before you start doing the process analysis. Start the process analysis with the taxonomy. So that's the high level, level one of the number of activities that could be involved. So, for example, raise a purchase order. That's going to be done in the business. It's not going to be done in finance. Match a purchase order or receipt a purchase order, excuse me, receipt a purchase order. Match the receipt to the invoice, process that through for payment, schedule your payment, form your reconciliations, resolve your queries, etc. These are all parts of the process. And don't forget the master data element, the static part, which actually seldom runs through the process, whereby you set the supplier up in the first place. And indeed, what I find, particularly when it comes to master file maintenance, is that it's just not taken seriously enough. It's allowed to grow. So that again is one of the key processes as part of this. So when I have the top level of those, I should be able to go back and look at the organization charts and look at the activities that I ticked off. And if I'm seeing a process in the taxonomy that's not in the org charts, I need to go find out who's doing it, and vice versa. If I see something which is being done or somebody is claiming as an activity within a particular area and it's not part of the process taxonomy, then again, there's something missing. Well, why are you doing it? And why isn't it part of this process if you are part of this team? See the way it starts to unpick one level at a time? Now you're down to, well, how do we do process analysis? We have our top level. These are the core activities, the core processes that we do. Then within that, we apply the volumes against it so that we have some context to know whether we do or don't really seriously have an exposure. And then we can commence the activity of mapping some of the processes. But I wouldn't go near a single member of staff to discuss with them what they do until those steps have been done first. You can almost consider those steps to be the baselining of process analysis. If you haven't done them, what's going to happen is you're going to have an open conversation with the member of staff concerned. Now remember this, right? You're there for a reason. You're there to run a change program. You have an end goal in mind. You operate at this level, you understand that. Then you or one of your project managers or stream leads goes to hold a discussion with somebody who's performing BAU activity of the matching of invoices, processing of invoices, resolving of queries, etc. They're not coming at this from the same level that you are. So you must go armed with all the information and the preparation. If you don't do that, you will be led by the nose. Not deliberately, but because the other person isn't thinking of it from your perspective. They will just download a whole load of information to you and leave you to try and reassemble it. Now, project teams cost money. So that's actually a counterproductive way of doing this. It's going to cost you money because it's going to cost you time. You need to do this effectively, right? When you do sit with them, I have considered in the past recording the sessions, because people, when they talk about what they do for their jobs, they don't do it in a structured manner. So it's very important that you lead the conversation down a structured path, and then leave an almost any other business section at the end where they can cover off something they feel they didn't have a chance to explore in sufficient detail. Whether you record the sessions or not, I generally find staff would feel uncomfortable with that, though they may not feel uncomfortable with just recording audio. I at the moment am recording both audio and video. I would consider it very much a nice to have, so you do need to pay attention. You do need to conduct these sessions not sat at the desk of the clerk themselves, because there's too many distractions, there's too many interruptions. And invariably, they will stop every 3 minutes to show you on screen, this is how I do it. That's not what you want. You want them to describe how they do it. And as part of the process you're going through, they are learning the fact that they need to describe it top down so that they can take responsibility for it. So these sessions will take place in a separate meeting room. They will never take place at the desk of the individual clerk that you're trying to understand the process. Okay? It's then your job to take that information away. As I've said previously, I'm not hung up on process maps. My job is not to create pretty pictures and hang them in the Louvre. My job is to work out whether a process is efficient, effective, and compliant. And to bring that back in a one-pager to the CFO and go, you've got a risk here, you have an inefficiency here, or you've actually got a high performer here, and draw attention to the positives. That's why it's important that you take as much information as you can out of these sessions in a manner that you can summarize and present upwards. If you end up with a stream of consciousness where somebody has just spoken at you for, in this instance, say 25 minutes, you're not going to be able to pull that together into a coherent story. And you can think of it like that. What are we attempting to do between the top line numbers, total cost of finance, size of the headcount within the business, size of the headcount within finance, cost of it, structure of it, activity per org chart, right the way down to taxonomy? We are telling a story. So when you go to display how the process works, you need to tell the story. You need to set the context. And you need to draw a conclusion. At the end of the day, you're managing something. You need to be able to put across an opinion. I have reviewed this to see whether it's effective. I've reviewed this to see whether it's efficient. And I've reviewed this to see whether it's compliant. And these are all part of the baselining process. You're baselining the process of the individual parts of finance that you look at. It's not just about headcount numbers. It's how you relate headcount numbers to organization design right the way down to the process. So I'm just coming up to 23 minutes. I did say that I would stick to 25 minutes in doing this. I will make this available on Spotify. I will make this available through LinkedIn. I'm delighted to see that all 3 newsletters, not just the Transform Finance with Michael Ryan one, they're still growing. And that's great. So we've now got about 6,500 subscribers across the newsletters. Feel free to subscribe to the podcast by whatever means you listen to podcasts, and follow me on LinkedIn. So thank you very much for listening. I hope by the time we speak again, United have managed to win another game. I haven't watched last Friday. I'm not entirely too hopeful. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. All the best, Mike.